At 2:30 in the morning on February 28, 2026, the world as you knew it ended. The flickering blue light of a Truth Social post wasn't just a status update, it was the digital signature on a death warrant for the global status quo. While you slept, the United States military initiated major combat operations across 5 Iranian cities simultaneously. The screen didn't just flash, it signaled the final breach of a mathematical levee that has been holding back a sea of red ink for a generation. You clicked because you felt the shift in the air before you saw the headlines. You sensed that this wasn't just another headline in a 24-hour news cycle, but a structural reset of your reality. The open question now isn't whether we are at war, but why the strike happened exactly 48 hours after the Geneva talks failed, and why your bank account is the real front line. The mainstream narrative is already being fed to you through the usual channels. They want you to believe this is a standard counterterrorism strike, a limited engagement to defend the American people from an imminent threat, a Cameroon's safety narrative designed to keep the markets calm and the public compliant while the aircraft carriers move into position. But you see, the data tells a much colder story. This isn't a reaction, it is an execution. The diplomacy in Geneva wasn't a search for peace, it was a clock. A precisely timed countdown used to position naval assets and emergency protocols while the official narrative kept you distracted with hope. This is a pre-planned regime change operation triggered not by a foreign threat, but by a domestic mathematical crisis that has finally reached its maturity wall. The evidence is hidden in the fine print of international law and the specific timestamps of the first wave of strikes. This file uncovers the invocation of major combat operations that bypassed every traditional diplomatic safety, the specific tactical targets designed to trigger a total regional reset, and the historical script proving this transition has been written many times before. This is not financial advice. I am not a licensed advisor. Your capital is your responsibility. Always conduct your own research, which means we must look at the first layer of this autopsy, the maturity wall. Most analysts are looking at the missiles. You need to look at the calendar. The strike on February 28th occurred precisely as the United States commercial real estate debt bubble hit its 2026 deadline. Over $875 billion in distressed debt was scheduled for a hard reset this month. A collapse of that magnitude would have vaporized the liquidity of the domestic banking system overnight. You see, war is the only mechanism in the imperial toolkit large enough to mask a systemic insolvency of this scale. By triggering major combat operations, the administration didn't just change the headlines, they changed the legal status of every dollar in the system. The moment the president spoke those 3 minutes of text, he activated emergency protocols that haven't been seen since 1973. The result is a confirmed supply shock that will hit Asian markets when they open Sunday morning. This isn't a market risk anymore, it is a scheduled event. The price of oil is no longer determined by supply and demand, but by the flight time of a hypersonic missile. If this specific mechanism just clicked for you, or you want to track these shifting cycles as they happen, join the Forensic Circle by hitting subscribe. Let's move to the deep dive. But here's the second layer, the head fake that the media is missing. They are focusing on the capital, Tehran. They think the objective was decapitation of the regime, but the targets in Isfahan and Karaj suggest a much darker purpose. The US military didn't just strike command centers, they struck the very infrastructure that China spent 8 years building as a backbone for the post-dollar world. Which means the real target wasn't just the Ayatollah, it was the collateral. But even this $800 billion debt wall is a distraction from the real trap hidden in the bank's fine print, a mechanism that ensures you pay for this war before the first tank even crosses the border. Which means the primary objective of this strike was never what the Pentagon briefers are telling you. They want you to focus on the fireballs over Tehran. They want you to believe that by striking the capital, they have severed the head of the snake. But you see, the head was never the target because the snake was designed to function without one. We are looking at the crime scene of a decapitation strike that was mathematically guaranteed to fail before the first F-35 left the deck of the Gerald R. Ford. To understand why, you must look at the mechanism of the 4-layer succession government. This is the black magic of Iranian statecraft, a structural redundancy that the West has consistently ignored. Leaked documents and intelligence reports from June 2025 confirm that the Iranian regime spent 8 months preparing for exactly this Saturday morning. In most modern nations, the chain of command is linear. If you remove the leader, the system enters a period of paralysis while the next in line is briefed. But in Iran, the command and control is dispersed into 4 autonomous cells that operate under what is known as Pre-delegated Launch Authority. This means the order to fire was not waiting for a phone call from the supreme leader. The order was already embedded in the doctrine. If the sensors detect an American strike of a certain magnitude, the missiles fly automatically. The system doesn't need a brain to strike back, it only needs a reflex. This is the first layer of the smoking gun. The United States military establishment, despite its multi-trillion-dollar budget, attempted to play a game of chess against a system that was playing a game of automatic retaliation. Which means the tactical surprise the Americans hoped for was a mathematical impossibility. The missiles were always going to fly. You see, the timing of the internet blackout provides the forensic proof. At the moment of the strike, national connectivity inside Iran dropped to exactly 4%. The mainstream media will tell you this was a cyber attack by the West to blind the regime. But the data shows the regime cut its own throat. By reducing connectivity to 4%, they moved all critical military communication to hardened underground fiber optic loops that no surface strike or electronic jamming can reach. They didn't lose control, they tightened it. They managed the information flow inside their territory while their missiles were already in the air over Israel. This leads us to the most dangerous technicality in this entire file, the depleted shield. While the American public is told that our missile defense systems are impenetrable, the inventory numbers tell a different story. The Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD, is the primary interceptor for the type of ballistic missiles Iran just launched. As of this morning, the global stockpile of THAAD interceptors is estimated to be between 480 and 540 units. Think about that number. Between 480 and 540 interceptors distributed across every American commitment worldwide. Iran has reconstituted an arsenal of over 2,000 missiles since June 2025. The math is no longer sustainable. If Iran launches a first wave of 500 missiles, the United States must exhaust its entire global stockpile of high-end interceptors just to achieve a 1-to-1 kill ratio. Which means there is no second wave defense. The shield is not a wall. It is a consumable resource that has just been spent. This is why the Iranian parliamentarian announced there are no red lines. He wasn't making a threat, he was describing a mathematical reality. When you have zeroed out your opponent's defensive inventory, you no longer have to worry about their response. And this is where the black magic affects your capital. Then there's the strategy. The idea of a swift, clean surgical strike is a fantasy. Iran's military isn't concentrated in one spot. It's dispersed, hidden in mountains and cities. It would be a messy, prolonged conflict with no clear winner. Modern warfare is complex, costly, and unpredictable. The real battlefield isn't just on the ground, it's on spreadsheets and in economic forecasts. What do you think the true cost would be? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives. The Strait of Hormuz is the world's most vital economic artery. 20% of the world's oil supply passes through a gap that is only 21 miles wide. The IRGC naval units that guard this strait operate under the same mobile, dispersed command as the missile batteries. They do not need an order from a secure location to execute a closure. They have been pre-authorized to turn off the global energy supply the moment the first American bomb hit Iranian soil. You see, the Saudi emergency oil supplies provide a cushion of only 10 to 15 days. After that, the global economy faces a supply shock of a scale that has not occurred since 1973. But here's the twist. The financial markets in New York and London are built on the assumption of infinite liquidity and just-in-time delivery. They are not priced for a world where 20% of the energy supply vanishes overnight, which means the hyperinflation we are about to witness isn't just a result of rising oil prices. It is the result of the systemic realization that the safety of the dollar was based on a military dominance that just hit an inventory wall. When the world realizes the shield is empty, they will stop treating the dollar as a safe haven and start treating it as a liability. If this technical reality of the depleted shield and the pre-delegated authority has opened your eyes to the risk your savings are currently facing, you need to be part of the forensic circle. Most people will ignore this data and pay the price when the markets open Sunday morning. But if you're the type of person who refuses to be a victim of the script, subscribe. We hold ourselves to a different standard here, and in a world of scripted chaos, information is the only collateral that matters. Now, we must close the loop on the question of the Geneva talks. Why would the United States negotiate in Geneva for 12 days while simultaneously positioning carriers for a strike? The aha moment comes when you realize the negotiations weren't about stopping the war. They were about ensuring the war started on a Saturday morning when the banks were closed. The regime change script required a window of 48 hours where the public could not move their capital out of the traditional banking system. By failing the talks on a Friday and striking on a Saturday, the architects of this operation ensured that your deposits are locked inside the burning building while the elite move their wealth into hardened assets. The no red lines policy doesn't just apply to Iran's missiles, it applies to the extraction of your purchasing power. Which means the war in the Middle East is the perfect force majeure event to explain away the destruction of your savings. They will tell you it was the Ayatollah's fault. They will tell you it was an unavoidable geopolitical tragedy. But the math shows it was a premeditated liquidation of the middle class to cover a debt maturity wall that was scheduled for February 2026 since the day the debt was issued. This is the clinical reality of the forensic whistleblower. We don't look at the flags, we look at the ledgers. And the ledgers show that this war is the final chapter of a book that has been written many times before. To understand how this movie ends, we have to look back at the patterns of the empires that stood exactly where we are standing today. The cycle dictates that after the inventory wall comes the imperial collapse. But before we examine the ghosts of Rome and the ruins of the British pound, there is one more black magic mechanism you must understand. The reason why the Gerald R. Ford carrier group was positioned in the Arabian Sea, despite having broken toilets and depleted morale just 3 days ago. It wasn't for strength, it was for bait. The final answer to the 2026 script lies not in what we are attacking, but in what we are willing to sacrifice to keep the debt cycle spinning for one more week. To understand the smoke over Tehran, you must first look at the dust of 1600. History is not repeating, it is rhyming. The math of empire is a scripted loop, and we have just turned the page to the final chapter. You see, there is a 7-stage pattern that has destroyed every global superpower from Rome to the Soviet Union. The sequence is clinical. It begins with the rise of the empire and the establishment of a reserve currency. But by the time an empire reaches stage 5, it faces a massive wealth gap and a mountain of debt that can no longer be serviced by productivity alone. We are no longer in stage 5. The strike on February 28, 2026 confirms that we have entered stage 6, currency debasement and war. When the debt becomes a mathematical impossibility, the empire has only one move left in its toolkit. It must trigger a global force majeure event to reset the ledger and mask the insolvency of the central bank. Which means the war in Iran is not a choice. It is a mathematical requirement of the 2026 maturity wall. Look at the fingerprints left on the Spanish Empire in the 1590s. Spain had spent a century extracting gold from the New World, fueling a global dominance that seemed eternal. But they hit a wall of perpetual interest and military overextension that their silver could no longer cover. The result was inevitable. They triggered a series of desperate conflicts to seize new collateral, only to find that the cost of the war accelerated the debasement of their currency. The British Empire followed the exact same script in the 1900s. They controlled the world's reserve currency and the seas, but the internal debt from their global expansion had reached a breaking point. By 1914, the safety of the British pound was a hollow shell. They didn't just stumble into the First World War. They used it as a global transition mechanism to move the debt off their books and onto the next hegemon. Now, apply that exact mathematical trigger to our current data. The United States has reached the same cliff. We are currently managing a global debt of over $315 trillion. The interest on that debt now exceeds the entire military budget. You see, the system is designed to be inescapable for those who don't understand its mechanics. The Federal Reserve mechanism triggered during the first wave of strikes on Saturday morning has not been utilized since the 1929 crash. This is the forensic proof that the safety narrative is a lie. In 1929, the mechanism consolidated the banking system and wiped out the equity of the middle class. In 2026, it transitions the world from the petrodollar to a programmable digital extraction system. The bombing of Iran during active negotiations was the final nail in the coffin of global trust. Bombing a negotiating country tells others that diplomacy is a tactical cover, not a strategic process. The immediate result is the death of reserve currency status. No one keeps their wealth in a currency backed by a country using negotiations as a targeting clock. This brings us to the historical parallel of the 1973 oil shock. In 1973, the world learned energy prices were a political weapon. In 2026, we learn energy as a binary switch. A 15-day cushion from Saudi supplies is all that stands between your lifestyle and systemic breakdown. If the Strait of Hormuz closes for over 3 weeks, essential supply chains will cease. Recent inflation will seem stable compared to the vertical spike coming on Monday morning. This is not a possibility. It is a mathematical certainty dictated by the cycle. We are the ones who actually see the machine. The roar of the lion is not a strong empire defending itself. It's a dying system consuming its own future. The fingerprints of the 1929 crash, 1973 shock, and 1600 Spanish collapse are all over the February 28th strike. The architects have run this script before, but this time the scale is global and the exit doors are being locked. The revelation you must accept is that the system is not broken. It is performing exactly as it was designed. The war is the product, the debt is the mechanism, and your purchasing power is the collateral. You cannot afford to miss the next file I open, because the second wave of this operation doesn't involve missiles. It involves the legal framework that allows banks to treat your deposits as their property when a national emergency is declared. Wait until you see the black magic hidden in the bank's fine print, scheduled to activate when oil hits $150 a barrel. History is not repeating, it is concluding. Would you like me to proceed to the final block to close this autopsy? The master key to this file is now in your hands. The strike at 2:30 a.m. was not tactical, but a mathematical necessity to mask the 2026 maturity wall. While the world sees a conflict of nations, you see a liquidation of collateral. Without this forensic data, you would be just another victim of the headlines. We are the ones who look at the fine print while others watch the explosions. The logic of the system dictates that this sequence is already moving toward the next phase. Most people will ignore this data and pay the price. But if you're the type of person who refuses to be a victim of the script, join the forensic circle by hitting subscribe. We hold ourselves to a different standard here. Our next briefing uncovers the black magic of the 2026 bank bail-in and the specific mechanism within Title II of the Dodd-Frank Act. This allows the system to freeze your liquidity the moment oil hits the critical threshold. You cannot afford to be blind when that mechanism activates. The path has been chosen. The gears are turning. As the Iranian Member of Parliament Ibrahim Azizi posted, "You have started down a path whose end is no longer in your control. The script is already written.